All opinions expressed on any program are those of the producer and are persons appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of DCTV. All producers and guests appearing on programs provide information and opinions based on information they consider to be reliable. DCTV does not affirm the completeness and accuracy. All DCTV members agree to adhere to DCTV's statement of compliance and are participants in a community medium forum where they're exercising their freedom of speech.
Good evening. I'm your host, Karen Udis. This show is a series that has been coming to you from DCTV since 2015 in a weekly program called the Network of Global Corporate Control. Today's program is called For Whom the Bell Tolls. That is a quote from John Donne. Quote, "No man is an island entire of itself. Any man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee." The title of Ernest Hemingway's famous book about the Spanish Civil War is For Whom the Bell Tolls. Thank you to DCTV, to Carmen Stanley, Project Director, Maurice Jackson, Studio Director, and Cruce Starnes, Audio and Prompter. This series is about the world's wealth, which was put into a trust managed by the boards of the World Bank and International Monetary Fund at the end of World War II. Many of the things we talk about in this series have been kept hidden from you. It's the central banks and the group directing the central banks, called the Black Nobility, that have been hiding the truth from you. I speak for a coalition that is in control of the world's wealth. The coalition also includes the world's military powers. This coalition was predicted by an accurate power transition model from the United States National War College that came to me in the World Bank's legal department in 2004. I mentioned this coalition the day after I wrote to the United States Defense Attaché in Tokyo. Japan's military troops are an important part of this coalition. Yesterday, I tweeted a comment on an article in Veterans Today that I wrote in 2014. The United States-Japan Committee, under the Status of Forces, is going to make sure that the United States will honor its defense pact with Japan. This is only possible with the United States monetary gold reserves in the global debt facility. And I'm showing you a graph which shows the weakness of the Federal Reserve note in terms of gold. This graph, along with the United States National War College's accurate power transition model, explains our coalition. The unconstitutional Federal Reserve note is simply an imposter. The United States dollar is alive and well and living here in the global debt facility. The world's people are directing this coalition and will retrofit any decisions after a global currency reset that will exchange the corrupt paper currencies issued by the Banking Cartel for the world's gold and for local currencies issued by villages and towns. There's another reason that our coalition is facing down the Banking Cartel. It's because people don't want to be pushed around by corrupt bankers. That was true at the end of World War II, when the world's wealth was deposited in the World Bank, and it's true today. It took me several hours to show that the countries of the world insisted that they have a voice at the World Bank, and that it was evident from a statement that the United States governor made to the members of the World Bank in 1946. It took me hours to post the statement on the internet, and you can read it in the teleprompter. And I attached in the teleprompter a memorandum which I gave to the board of the World Bank when I was reinstated as acting general counsel. Don't be put off if any of my statements seem unlikely. I can document all of my statements because they are all true. There are also electromagnetic weapons that affect your ability to accept this information. More than 2/3 of the people are very susceptible to these weapons. The electromagnetic frequencies, these weapons, there were stories about them when they were used on some of the people in the United States Embassy in Cuba. I noticed that the brain imaging science is sometimes given in popular magazine articles, and I've shown you one that was in the National Geographic. Information on mind control and advanced weapon experiments on civilians, well, there's a lot of it. You can read the patents on that technology. We, the people, are confronting the banking cartel in a fight to stay out of World War III. We're planning to wind down the banking cartel because it's bankrupt from the $2 quadrillion in Treaty of Versailles bonds that were issued between World War I and World War II to some of the elite in exchange for their gold. Jose Rizal and Ferdinand Marcos gathered most of these bonds into the global debt facility. We have already heard from Sir Ralph, who has $2 trillion worth of these bonds. Sir Ralph offered to help solve Greece's financial problems with them. And I told Sir Ralph that he could keep his bonds. So that you understand, the paper currency fiat system is coming down, and the Federal Reserve System and the rest of the Bank for International Settlements and that giant conglomerate referred to by Vitaly Glatfelder and Battiston of ETH Zurich as the super entity, this is in receivership in the global debt facility that holds the world's wealth. Greece's and other countries' debts are getting offset against the Treaty of Versailles bonds held by the global debt facility. There are many persons who are trying to prevent the Board of Governors of the Bretton Woods institutions from dismantling the network of global corporate control. The Board of Governors of the Bretton Woods institutions administers the global debt facility. The International Court of Justice, the CIA, the Committee of 300, and Ferdinand Marcos's son, Tiburcio Villamor Marcos, to name a few, tried to steal the world's monetary gold reserves and other assets in the global debt facility. And the network of global corporate control keeps breaking links when I disclose these things. The Board of Governors of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund is dealing with a question about what to do with the excess currencies held by speculators. They're going to have to decide how to carve up the network of global corporate control's subsidiaries when winding down that giant conglomerate. There are many claims for restitution by people who have been harmed by the network of global corporate control, including claims of indigenous peoples harmed by colonialism, trading of their birth certificates, peoples tortured by the network of global corporate control, slavery, climate modification, people subjected to mind control and other hidden DARPA technologies, people whose health has been impacted by GMOs and other hidden carcinogens and toxins, hidden cures for diseases, to list just a few claims. The network of global corporate control has been killing doctors who can restore people's health. If it's left to the Board of Governors to deal directly with these claims, there's going to be a huge risk that we create an institution that oppresses. If people can accept that the global debt facility will handle currency and Fukushima only, because we're facing extinction if these problems aren't solved, and leave the other issues to each people in each country, we have a fighting chance. This is a dialogue, and I'm going to do what I can to further the dialogue. Sequencing will be key, helping people get their health and reasoning back so they can make informed decisions seems like a plan. How to compensate people who are holding Treaty of Versailles bonds outside the global debt facility is another claim in the list. I expect we're going to have our hands full initially in helping people understand how necessary it is that we have a peaceful transition so that they thank those 1%ers that are making the peaceful transition possible. This difficult question of amnesty was debated, and there are many comments to me about it. It may just be that we never get around to paying the elite who are still holding the Treaty of Versailles bonds, and that is what I said to Sir Ralph. We, the people, are having a dialogue among ourselves about the global currency reset. You can see this dialogue in the archives of this series on YouTube. Many people are asking when we're going to start exchanging currencies, and my answer, well, I tweeted this and it's not in the teleprompter, but what I said was it's actually up to the black nobility. I said we'll have the global currency reset just as soon as the doofuses and the black nobility have realized that a critical mass of humanity is not going to back down, and neither am I. As I already told you, if the banking cartel were going to win, they would have silenced me and kept me from speaking for our coalition. I'm obviously still getting through. That's what I mean when I say that part of my job is to be a canary in the coal mine. Miners would bring a canary with them into the coal mine to serve as a warning. I'm your canary in the coal mine. So long as I'm getting through, you know that the global currency reset is on track. Of course, it's taking time to deliver concrete results. We're talking about a fundamental transformation, and the biggest change is in our knowledge about what it means to be human and how we deal with each other. Another question that people have is how I got this job of being the lawyer for the global debt facility containing much of the world's wealth. The short answer is that I was in the right place at the right time. The World Bank's legal department stands between the banking cartel and the world's wealth in the global debt facility. My reports of corruption at the World Bank and refusing to back down as the corruption kept getting deeper helped the boards of the World Bank and International Monetary Fund, who are in charge of the global debt facility, to notice me. Last week, I tweeted the chronology in my 2011 testimony to the European Parliament, and I wrote, "A cover-up at the heart of the international financial system must be resolved." I also tweeted my reports to the world's accountants. None of the accountants, none of them, were willing to admit their role in any of the fraud and corruption that I was reporting. The accountants did not add up. And you'll see in the teleprompter what I was saying to all of these people. And I want to make two more points in my prepared remarks. I'm going to read you the statement that Donald Trump failed to answer in my affidavit for the commercial lien in which I bankrupted Donald Trump. When some people say that I didn't get Donald Trump's attention, I can assure you that I did, and I also got the attention of his legal team. How do I know this for sure? Well, Nita Johnson tried to bribe me after Trump faked the elections. The elections were not legal because the Constitution was not in effect. Trump is a liar, and he's continuing to lie. He was never duly elected by the American people because a military government was already secretly in place, stealing all Americans' properties under war powers. And this was the statement that Donald Trump couldn't answer. Donald Trump failed to acknowledge that the United States is not operating under the Constitution of 1789, nor has he acknowledged that the United States monetary gold reserves are administered by the Board of Governors of the World Bank and International Monetary Fund, because they're in a trust established at the end of World War II by General Eisenhower and President Truman. Instead, Donald Trump has perpetuated the hoax on the American people, despite having had the opportunity to rectify these falsehoods. Donald Trump has harmed me personally with these lies and falsehoods, as this has prevented me from returning to the World Bank's headquarters and working on the global currency reset agreed to by the Board of Governors of the World Bank and IMF, and returning the Constitution of 1789 of the United States via an Article 5 Constitutional Convention. Donald Trump failed to respond, and he's in default and owes me as overseer mandate trustee of the Global Debt Facility. The last point I want to make is about title to property. This is an important point. The banking cartel has stolen all your property, all of it. When you register land and cars with the state authorities, the title to all your property is now actually registered in the name of the bankers. YouTube erased this information when I answered a comment, and so I'm going to give you the missing question and answer now. And you can also read it in the teleprompter. And he wrote, Karen Udis, what about the titles for cars and the deeds for homes? Those are also fraudulent. How are they planning to fix that? And my answer, in the old days before FDR ran the greatest of scams, all the records of deeds and property used to be filed in every state in what was known as the Great Register. It was during the Roosevelt years that the Great Registers started to disappear from the keeping places in the states. Under the emergency and bankruptcy, the land of property holding citizens was claimed as collateral. All the deeds and titles were taken. Nowadays, you either get a certificate of deed, a warranty deed, or deed in trust. And when you get when you pay for your property, you never get the titles to your property back. This is because you don't have title to your land or your home. The government holds all your property in trust because you've been deemed incompetent under their law to manage your own affairs. When you buy a new car, the MSO, which is technically the bill of sale from the manufacturer, is sent to the state, and the state issues you a certificate of title. The certificate serves the same purpose for your cars as it does for your real estate. People, you own nothing of major value that you think you do. Even you and your labor are nothing but collateral to the bogus bankruptcy. When did you stop being personnel and become a human resource? Folks, you don't even own the skin you live in. You're economic slaves in the absolute truest sense of the word, to the Federal Reserve and to the international bankers and Metro. Now, I'm going to stop my prepared comments, and I'm just going to speak to you extemporaneously. A lot of you want to see whether I'm being dictated to. No, I write every single word in the teleprompter, and one of the reasons that I do this is because in the very beginning, 3 years ago, when I started just having bullet points and trying to speak, I realized that I wasn't making myself crystal clear. And of course, because the teleprompters are circulated, many people don't want to sit and listen to a video. They'd rather skim through the teleprompters. So that's why I do it that way. But I also want to speak extemporaneously because people tell me that way they can tell that I'm really saying all these things. It sounds more sincere to them. So that's the end of the prepared comments. One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about is extraterrestrials. They're not part of any of the things we're talking about. Sometimes people will start talking about abductions and things like that. That's just, they may believe these things, but that's because of the very powerful military technology in mind control. There are no extraterrestrials involved in any of what we're talking about. The bankers obviously want to distract everybody and get their attention by this. And I can tell you just before I did this preparing for the programs, there were two separate people that contacted me telling me that I needed to talk about extraterrestrials. Well, as I tell you, I don't subscribe to mind control. I usually do the exact opposite. So what I'm telling you is that extraterrestrials are not anything that we need to be concerned about whatsoever. They're not involved. What's involved is the thieves in the banking cartel and all the people in the world. And don't be distracted. That's one of the things I wanted to talk about. And one of the other things that I wanted to talk about is what a pleasure it is, actually, to be part of this coalition. In the beginning, it was a little bit tough because I didn't know as much in the beginning. All I knew was that there was a lot of corruption going on, and it was my job to fight that corruption. And as things progressed, I started learning a lot. I started dealing with people who the banking cartel was sending to me, telling me that they were whistleblowers, or telling me that actually one of the people that the banking cartel sent to me was Wolfgang Struck. And when Wolfgang Struck was going to try to sell the Treaty of Versailles bonds at a steep discount, that's when I knew there was something radically wrong. So you can see through the years that I've been dealing with these issues, you can see the chronology. You can see how I learned. And of course, as people found out that I was involved, they started teaching me, and we really have grown by leaps and bounds, not only in terms of numbers, but mostly in terms of learning what it's like to be human, because that's one of the biggest factors that we're now involved in. All of humanity is involved, and when this global currency reset is concluded, we are going to know ourselves a lot better. One of the questions, of course, is if I'm standing up to the banking cartel, I must be some kind of corrupt person and part of the corruption. And you have to think about that. You have to look at the past. You have to look at what I've done all along. And then you have to see how each time people attempted to bribe me, I wasn't going to be bribed. I was just going to keep on with the fight. And I'm actually pretty well suited for this kind of endeavor, because not only am I very stubborn and very curious, but I also happen to be trained in martial arts. I was captain of the NYU fencing team. I happen to enjoy when I'm involved in a fight. I happen to enjoy seeing how far I can go. And once I understood that I was part of a coalition, and I started to understand that in 2004, because the National War College, the person who developed this model for the National War College, Yasser Kugler, came to me. And I started actually testing his model. First, we went to Ghana to test the model. And so when I realized after a while that we weren't just talking about World Bank corruption, but we were talking about world corruption, and I realized that the World Bank is a microcosm of the world. You have all of the countries whose votes are weighted by the size of their GDP. And that's why the United States, which has the largest GDP, that's shorthand for gross domestic product, that's why the United States has 17% of the votes. So once I got involved in this fight, and I knew that the fight could be won. I wasn't going to stop. And of course, one of the things that Jacek Kugler said to me right from the get-go was he said, if we back down, we're into World War III. So I knew there was no backing down. It was a one-way street. And that actually suited me just fine because I knew that the chances that we were going to win were over 90%. And that's the coalition that we're now involved in. And I can tell you what it's like now. It's really incredible. I'll give you just one instance. I usually, before these shows, I usually drive to the local beauty parlor and get myself professionally made up. And it's about a 15-minute drive. Well, what happened on this drive was a helicopter flew overhead along my route as I'm driving along. That was pretty incredible. But what this also tells you is it tells you that the people in the U.S. military are now, they know me, they know what I'm doing, and the military, you got the military's attention when there was an attempted nuke in 2013, right off the coast of Charleston, and when there was a first strike against, there was an order to have a first strike against Russia in 2015, and the military did the opposite. By this time, the military knows full well that the United States Constitution is not in effect, and they're just waiting for the people to get their act together, and they also would like very much to have the gold that belongs to the United States, and they will have that gold, and all of the countries are going to have their gold. One of the emails that I got, that I sent you a copy of, was there was the chief of a 7 million member NGO who was asking how he could get the gold back to the people. And I just, I gave him his marching papers, because the way the gold is going back is it's going back to each and every person in their currency, and the paper currency is all corrupt. You have to study what paper currency is, because the bankers are giving you pieces of paper, and they get to keep the difference between what the face amount of the bill is and the currency. So the currency, as far as the bankers are concerned, belongs to them, and it really shouldn't belong to them. The currency should belong to us. And that's why we're talking about local currencies as well. That's in every village, in every town. When you have that, you have full employment. You're in charge of your own economies. And what you have is, more importantly, you have the building block so that each and every country is going to be governed by the people, as opposed to what you now have, which is a system where the bankers have, they've turned all the countries into corporations. The bankers think that they're entitled to run the entire world, and when you study what's going on, you realize this. And trained as a lawyer, well, I realized at a certain point that all of the courts are corrupt. They're not real courts. They're just, the judges are play acting. Now, maybe some of the judges don't understand that they're really sitting in a maritime law court, but many of the judges are corrupt. We are not islands. We know we suffer a loss when anyone is harmed. We all care that our brethren are exploited and oppressed. That's what is going to enable us to work our way out of the bankers' fractional reserve fiat money scam. Until next week, I'm your host, Karen Hudis.